talk about pollution. Galena Creek, which is the namesake for Galena Creek Regional Park and Galena Creek Visitor Center, is a tributary of the Truckee River watershed. So Galena Creek starts up in Mount Rose and flows down through the park, through neighborhoods and grazing areas and under roads and through parks like this one, and joins Steamboat Creek, and then joins the Truckee River and Sparks, which then flows into Pyramid Lake. So today we're going to take you on a journey from Galena Creek Regional Park, following Galena Creek all the way to the Truckee River, and exploring the possible pollution sources that could make our creek unhealthy and could make the Truckee River a polluted or unhealthy river. So our first stop on this journey is Galena Creek Regional Park. So Galena Creek flows through the south side of our park and feeds Maryland's Pond, which is a popular fishing spot in this area. So when visitors leave trash or dog poop or other pollutants in the area, they often end up in our creek, which flows down to the Truckee River. And this trash can leave plastics and other kinds of chemicals and things that are just unhealthy for the animals that live in our creek, the plants that depend on our creek, and people who like to fish and swim and recreate. So if you're at the creek, if you're at our park, please make sure to pack out all of your trash or leave it in the trash cans, but please don't leave any trash or dog poop or human waste at the park, because eventually when it snows or rains, it'll end up flowing down into the creek. Erosion also occurs near our creek, and this happens when plants are uprooted by storms or when there's a lot of traffic near the creek. And what happens when erosion occurs is nutrients are removed from the soil and sediments are added to the water, and so this kind of negatively impacts the animals and also the plants around a creek. And so you can see behind me, we've been propagating willows to stabilize the soil again and prevent erosion, and that project's been funded through the Truckee River Fund. So one of the areas that Galena Creek runs through that can be a big contributor of pollutants is golf courses. So behind us is the Montreux Golf Course, which is pretty close to Galena Creek Regional Park. And at golf courses, a lot of times they use fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides to keep their grass green and healthy and free of pests. And those fertilizers are full of chemicals or elements like nitrogen and phosphorus, and things that in low amounts are really healthy for ecosystems. But in those higher amounts, when they run off into the creek, they can cause increased nutrient loads, which cause things like algal blooms and other invasive species to kind of take off in the creek, which can be really damaging for fish and other animals in the creek that rely on oxygen. So now we're at Steamboat Creek, which is the creek that Galena Creek flows into before it gets to the Truckee River. And one of the things that happens in this area is grazing by livestock, so cows and other animals. And the way that grazing impacts a watershed is through two ways. So there's animal waste, and like I said earlier, animal waste can increase the nutrient load in a waterway. So when cows or other animals poop, there's a lot of nitrogen and other elements in there, and that will increase the nutrient load of the water, causing things like algal blooms. Another way that livestock impacts an area is through erosion. So livestock loves to eat riparian plants, so things like willows and cottonwoods, and especially the really young willows and cottonwoods. So you can see in this area, even though there's a creek here, there aren't a lot of plants around, like big trees and things that help hold down the soil. And that's why you can see the cut banks along the stream, and probably one of the reasons that the water here has such high turbidity. And waterways with high turbidity in areas where the water isn't supposed to have high turbidity can decrease the biodiversity, the plants and animals that live there, and the health of the overall ecosystem. more residential area near Veterans Parkway, which is a popular road, and behind us is Steamboat Creek again, and that's on its way to the Truckee River. So there are a lot of ways that people as individuals and as families can help keep pollutants and trash out of our waterways. So one of those is properly disposing of hazardous material. So if you change your oil or use some kind of chemical in your house, it's important to properly dispose of it. A lot of those things don't just go into the trash. They need to go to specific waste treatment facilities. So researching your local facilities and what needs to be disposed of in what way is really important for keeping pollutants and unwanted nutrients out of our water system. Another way is when you're driving, please keep your trash in your car. So sometimes people just throw their trash outside of their car and think that it doesn't affect them and it doesn't affect their water system, but in fact it does. If you're driving on this overpass or anywhere on this road and you throw your trash out of your car, it's going to end up in Steamboat Creek, which is going to end up in the Truckee River, which is a water source for drinking and recreation around here. So keeping all your trash contained in your car and waiting until you get to a trash can is really important. So we're at Steamboat Creek again. We are almost at the Truckee River at this point, and we are outside the Sparks wastewater treatment plant. And wastewater treatment plants are obviously necessary parts of any sort of community with a lot of people because they process all of the human waste in the city, but they can have negative effects on the water system. So wastewater treatment plants can release something called effluent, which is just liquid waste. And that can increase the nutrient loads in water, so increase levels of nitrogen and phosphorus and things like that that are really high in human waste. And that again causes algal blooms and similar processes like that. And what happens when an algal bloom occurs is the algae uses a lot of the oxygen in the water to process all of the nutrients in the water and ends up, growing to large sizes. And because it's using the oxygen, things like fish and other animals in the water that depend on oxygen to breathe no longer have oxygen, and you have something called a die-off. So the fish and the aquatic invertebrates and the crustaceans and everything in the water dies because the algae has used all of the oxygen in the water. That can occur when there are increased nutrient loads, and wastewater treatment plants, because they have so much waste, can introduce things, harmful bacteria like E. coli. And E. coli has really negative effects on water systems for people. So it can make water unusable for drinking water. It can also make water dangerous for swimming because people can get E. coli from swimming in the water. So obviously we need wastewater treatment plants, but it is important to recognize that they can be a pollution source for our water systems. So here we are at the Truckee River. The Truckee River will flow all the way into Pyramid Lake, which is northeast of Reno. And as you've learned from this video, pollution can occur at any point in a watershed area, from all the way up at Mount Rose, where Galena Creek starts, all the way to Pyramid Lake. And it's important that we as citizens of a watershed do what we can to prevent and decrease the amount of pollution in our watershed. So the different pollutions that we talked about in this video can impact the plants and animals that live in the water, can impact the plants and animals that live around the water, and can impact humans who enjoy fishing or swimming or drinking water. So it's important that we as a community can come together and figure out where are we involved in watershed pollution and what can we do as individuals, as a community, and as a society to decrease the amount of pollution that we are putting into our water system.